my story kind of starts in 2014, and I was working at my local horse stables, so I was used to having aches and pains, but I started getting a really intense bone pain down my shoulder blade, and at first we wrote it off thinking it was nothing, but then it started to get worse, and particularly at night the pain was really intense, but we didn't think too much of it. And then one morning I woke up and I actually thought that I'd had a stroke, because my right eyelid had drooped significantly and I could hardly see out of it, and my pupils were two different sizes, and I also noticed that my kind of upper inner arm on the right side was numb and I couldn't feel it. So we started to get concerned, because that's obviously all on the right side of my body, but we tried to keep calm and just went to the GP. And that's kind of where it all started. My mum and I went to the GP, and the nurse was mostly confused, so she sent us round to the opticians, who checked my eyes out and said they were completely fine and there was nothing untoward there. And we went in to see the doctor, who just sent me for an MRI scan at my local hospital. At the hospital, I had my MRI scan, and the doctor came out straight away and said, "You need to go back up to the ward." So we were slightly concerned, but we went back up to the ward. And at this point I was kind of kept in the dark, because my parents wanted to protect me and so didn't want me to worry. And at that point my mum got taken into a side room by herself and was told that I had a 12cm mass in my chest and that I needed to be sent to Birmingham Children's Hospital immediately. So that night after the scan, I got sent to Birmingham Children's Hospital, and I got wheeled onto an oncology and haematology ward, Teenage Cancer Trust. And that's kind of when I put two and two together, and I asked my dad, "Do I have cancer?" And he tried to hold it together and just went, "We don't know." But the next day I had a biopsy and a X-ray and CT scan done, and within the next few days I got the diagnosis of Ewing sarcoma. My treatment plan started with chemotherapy, as at the time surgery wasn't an option, because my chest was kind of described as a plate of spaghetti, and there were so many nerves that if we tried to do surgery it'd be too risky. So I just went on a treatment of chemotherapy that was going to last 12 months. The first course of treatment was really difficult. I think it's always the one that hits the hardest, because you just don't know what to expect. So I was really wiped out. But they did gradually get easier, but obviously still comparatively rubbish. But then it was really exciting, because after 4 chemotherapies, my tumour had actually shrunk by 80% of its own mass. So it was much smaller, and my surgeons told me that surgery was now a possibility. And so in July of 2014, I had my surgery. My surgery involved taking out the entire of my tumour and my first rib, and also a little section of my lung, just for good measure in case it had spread. Took about, I think it was about 6.5 hours in total. I had blood transfusions, and apparently my family were just walking around Birmingham like zombies, because, you know, what can anyone do in that situation but wait painstakingly. But everything went well, and then I recovered in about a week. Which is kind of funny, because my main motivation was I had tickets to go see Wicked in the theatre, and that was a week after my surgery, and so I was like, I will go to that theatre show, and I will. And I ended up going with a chest drain in and a bucket, because I was that determined that I was going to go see Wicked, and it was great, so it was a good plan. After my surgery, I continued with chemo, but I was also lucky enough to go to America for proton therapy. So my case went before a committee to see whether the NHS would fund me, and amazingly enough they did. And so me, my mum and my dad shipped off to Oklahoma for 3 months, and I had proton therapy over there, which was really exciting, because it was, you know, the kind of up-and-coming therapy of the time. I, as a 13-year-old, found it amazing, because I just got to leave school and go to America for 3 months, so it was super exciting. And yeah, the staff over there were wonderful. Yeah, it was amazing. After my trip to America, I came back and I carried on chemo up until January 2015, and that's when I had my first clear scan, which was super exciting, obviously over the moon, but it was also terrifying, because in that moment you know that your journey's kind of over at that point, or at least kind of, and the idea of going back to kind of normal life was more terrifying than staying in the hospital. So it was going to take some getting used to, and it did. It took me a long time to kind of re-enter society, as it were. Obviously I missed a lot of school. I missed the entirety of year 8, and you know, that's in education-wise, it's not that important. You mostly just mess around with your friends, but it's still so important for kind of making friends and becoming who you are. And so that was really difficult because I didn't have that space to kind of grow and find out who I was among other people. And so when I kind of went back to school, it was really difficult to just slot back into the friendship group that I'd left. And for a long time, I actually resented the people that I was friends with at the time because they just left. They evidently didn't know how to deal with my illness, but I hated them for it. And in time, it got less and less kind of hateful, and I understand their position now. But to anyone also feeling that, I think be patient with your friends. They don't know how to handle you being ill just as much as you don't know how to handle yourself being ill. So kind of try not to be too judgmental of them, and you know, I encourage open conversations with them because I wish that's what I'd done. It was hurtful because I think I had one friend visit me in the hospital, and you could just tell that she was visibly uncomfortable. She just hated the whole experience and then never wanted to come back. But then obviously having that year out, they'd moved on, you know, they'd dated other people I didn't know of, or they painted their nails a new colour, and I was like, none of that mattered to me anymore. I didn't care. You know, my life was at stake. I didn't care that Joe was dating Natasha or whatever. So I found their kind of issues fickle in a way, and I thought I was above them. Whereas, you know, I know as a 13-year-old I should have probably, you know, or I would have cared about that. So it is difficult to kind of get your priorities straight, if that makes sense. I grew up so fast, and I think you have to in order to cope. You know, I mean, at 13, you think you own the world, you think you can do anything, and so to have it suddenly get much smaller and be contained to a hospital bed, you have to kind of compartmentalise it and grow up and say, I've got to do this. And in a way, it's a very good survival mechanism because it works and it got me through it. But, you know, I am much more mature for it now, and it did make all the childhood things kind of fickle. And it came back to bite me later on because kind of when I got to 16, 17, I realised that I never had that chance to be a kid, and all I wanted to do was be a kid. So for my 21st birthday, I got a bouncy castle. And yeah, so absolutely my advice would be take it on. If you feel like you missed out, go and do that thing that you missed out on because you'll feel so much better for it. I had my treatment when I was in year 8 of secondary school, and that's, in all things considered, it's quite a good year to miss because you don't really do any kind of real structural things. You haven't chosen your options yet, so it's not too bad. You know, you do still miss quite a significant amount of learning, and especially social time and kind of building those kind of relationships. But I tried as much as I could to get work done when I was in and out of hospital. I did love school. I was a bit of a nerd, so whenever I was off treatment and felt well enough, I would go back into school. But obviously it wasn't a priority. But I still went on to get really good GCSE results. I got into the college that I wanted to get into. I then got really good grades there. I got into my chosen university to do a law degree, and now I'm doing my master's degree in healthcare ethics and law, with a hope to write a dissertation about childhood cancer clinical trials and all the legal and ethical issues around there. When I was on treatment, I think I had one session with a counsellor who pretty much just said, those bad thoughts you're having, just stop. And I went, that is useful, I'm definitely going to do that. And it just wasn't useful at all. And then from that point onwards, there was kind of no mention of mental health. There was no check-ins. It was just, you know, we can give you some drugs to make you less sad. And I took them, but it was not helping the kind of underlying trauma that was evidently growing. And again, that came back to bite me because when I was about 17, I just had a big mental breakdown because I'd found that I was harbouring all of my feelings to protect my parents. Because you get a clear scan and you're fine. It kind of, especially being young, I think your parents think you're okay now. You need to be okay now. And so for their sake, I was like, yes, I am okay. I'm going to allow you to think that I am okay. And so I just kind of hid it. And it wasn't until something really stupid happened that it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. And I just broke, and I just went into my mum and said, I think I need to go to therapy. and we arranged that, and she just looked at me and said, "You should not be this sad at your age." And it just broke me, because yeah, I shouldn't be, but that's just the way it is. So kind of my advice to anyone would be, take your mental health seriously. If those things aren't being given to you, seek them out, because the sooner you kind of start talking through your own journey and understanding and coming to terms with it, the better you'll be later on. Brain Cancer Research Trust have been invaluable to us as a family. It really gave me a space as well to talk about my story and be able to own it, rather than kind of, you know, whereas in secondary school, for example, I was the cancer girl. I was the cancer girl, and I'm quite proud of that now, and you know, I can use my story to like empower and inspire other people, and that's mostly what Brain Cancer Research Trust has done for me, and make me proud and make me know that I'm making a difference, which, yeah, I couldn't be happier for it. My journey and my cancer experience has definitely kind of guided where my career is going to go and where my interests lie, but absolutely embrace that. If it's going to change you, it's, you know, I think your journey is going to change you, and that's inevitable, but I think the more you can embrace that, you know, it's going to lead to kind of beautiful places. So don't worry, just let it happen.